Why are you staring at it like that? Kira's voice was soft but curious, barely above a whisper. Ezra blinked, his eyes still wide, his gaze locked on the creature. I don't know. It just feels wrong. You're not the first one to feel that way, Kira replied, her eyes scanning the room, avoiding the growing tension. But they're not like us. They don't understand how we view them. Ezra finally turned to look at her, the confusion in his eyes deepening. It's an animal, Kira. A pet. How is it possible that it can change the course of a war? Kira hesitated. She had asked herself that same question many times. In the grand scheme of things, war was fought with weapons, strategies, and the will of the people. But now? Now, it was a pet, a simple, harmless creature that held the fate of their survival in its tiny paws. Ezra's gaze flickered back to the creature. It was a small, spherical being with gleaming metallic fur, a kind of reflective substance that almost seemed to shimmer in the dim light of their makeshift meeting room. The creature was an alien, a non-human, and it belonged to the enemy. But the thing was, it was the key to everything. The war had started the same way all wars did, over resources, over power, over differences that were too vast to bridge. But in this case, it wasn't just a matter of borders or beliefs. It was about survival. The humans of Earth had found themselves in the midst of an intergalactic conflict against a race of beings known as the Curnai. The Curnai were taller, stronger, and far more technologically advanced than humanity could ever have dreamed. Their ships were like metal leviathans, and their weaponry could obliterate entire cities with a single thought. They didn't see humans as anything more than pests, a nuisance to their grand designs. The humans, desperate and scattered, fought back with everything they had, using the limited resources they could scrape together. It wasn't enough. Every strategy failed. Every battle seemed like a lost cause. And then the pets. It started innocently enough. Some humans had found themselves captured by the Curnai during a skirmish, only to be released under strange circumstances. Their captors, the Curnai soldiers, didn't seem to have any interest in harming them. Instead, they seemed intrigued by something much smaller, something that wasn't even involved in the war itself. Do you want to know what they really are? A voice behind Ezra startled him, and he spun to face it. It was Commander Luna, one of the highest-ranking officers in the Resistance. Ezra frowned, confused. What? The Curnai pets? Not just pets, Luna corrected, her tone sharp. They're a cultural bridge. The Curnai, for all their superiority, are deeply connected to their pets. These animals are part of them. They live with them, protect them, and share an unspoken bond with them. Ezra's brow furrowed. So, you're telling me that these creatures are the secret weapon? Luna nodded slowly, her gaze distant. In a way, yes. The Curnai have underestimated us, but they've made one critical mistake. They assume we have no understanding of their culture. They think we are primitive. But what they didn't expect is that we would learn from their pets. It was a bizarre, almost ridiculous turn of events, yet it was real. The captured humans had begun to notice something strange about the Curnai soldiers whenever their pets were involved. These creatures, small and seemingly insignificant, had an effect on the soldiers. The Curnai's intense, almost cold demeanor softened when they were in the presence of their pets. These little animals, with their soft fur and gentle nature, had a calming influence on the ruthless soldiers. It was a connection that even the Curnai couldn't fully comprehend. Somehow, the humans had begun to see it. Kira and Ezra had spent days studying the pets, learning everything they could from the captured humans. They found that the Curnai, while technologically superior, lacked a deeper connection with their emotions. They relied on logic and cold efficiency. But these pets, they were the Curnai's lifeline. In their presence, the soldiers softened. They showed signs of care, empathy, something the Curnai didn't display anywhere else. And so, in an attempt to survive and perhaps turn the tide of the war, the humans began to do the unthinkable. They befriended the pets. What are you thinking? Kira's voice brought Ezra back to the present, where the small alien pet now sat beside them, calm and quiet. Ezra exhaled sharply, his mind racing with the enormity of it all. He had never imagined that the key to victory, to peace, would come in the form of these innocent creatures. But the Curnai didn't understand humans' bond with animals. They didn't see the potential of this alliance. "We've got to try," Ezra finally said, determination filling his voice. "If the pets can make them feel something, anything, then maybe we can stop the war. Maybe, just maybe, we can show them that we're not so different after all." Kira nodded, her eyes now focused on the creature beside them. It was small, but its impact would be anything but. The future of humanity, and perhaps the galaxy, depended on understanding this strange, unspoken connection between species. Over the next several months, the humans and their newfound allies began to form a plan. The pets became their secret weapon, a symbol of peace, a bridge between two worlds at war. It was subtle at first, a gesture of kindness here and there, a shared moment of care for the creatures. Slowly, the Curnai soldiers began to notice. At first, they didn't understand what was happening. How could something as simple as a pet change everything? But then, something shifted. It was an impossible thing, really, when you thought about it. A war between two species, each with their own pride and power, could never be won with mere animals. But it wasn't the pets themselves, it was the lesson they taught. Through their bond with the creatures, the Curnai soldiers began to see humanity not as a threat, but as a species capable of kindness, of understanding, of emotion. And maybe, just maybe, that was enough to end the war. Months passed, and the humans learned quickly. It wasn't enough to simply care for the Curnai pets. They had to understand them, to connect with them in ways the Curnai never had. It was about respecting the creatures as more than just tools, as more than just living symbols of an alien race. The humans had to see them as beings in their own right, individuals with their own personalities, quirks, and needs. Kira had developed a particular bond with one of the pets, a small, tentacled creature with soft, velvety skin. Its large, almond-shaped eyes seemed to observe everything with an eerie calmness, and yet Kira found herself drawn to it, speaking to it as though it were a friend. She learned its likes and dislikes, its moods, its reactions. She discovered that it had an odd fondness for human music, especially the sounds of strings. The moment she played a soft tune on a makeshift guitar, it would curl up beside her, its tentacles lightly swaying in time with the rhythm. It was as if the creature understood the music, understood her. And it was this connection that started to spread among the humans. They treated the Curnai pets not as captives or instruments of war, but as companions. Soon, every human soldier and resistance fighter had a pet, and they began to notice changes in their Curnai counterparts. The soldiers who were once cold and indifferent began to soften in the presence of their pets. Some, like Kira's tentacled friend, would even reach out to the humans, seeking affection and comfort. Ezra had always been skeptical of this strategy. He wasn't sure how a creature that barely understood human speech could make a difference in a war that had claimed so many lives. But as he watched the interaction between Kira and the pet, watched the way the Curnai soldiers hesitated, then approached them slowly, tentatively, as if they were afraid to be vulnerable, he began to see something he hadn't expected: hope. The Curnai, with all their coldness and pride, were learning how to care again. And perhaps, more importantly, they were learning how to trust. One night, as the human resistance and Curnai forces met on the front lines, something extraordinary happened. The battlefield was quiet, the sounds of distant artillery fire just a murmur in the background. Ezra stood at the edge of the camp, waiting for any sign of movement. Kira was with him, her pet now nestled peacefully in her arms. But the others? They were waiting too. For the first time, the humans and Curnai soldiers were in the same camp, both sides preparing for the battle ahead, but neither side was in a hurry to start the violence. It was then that one of the Curnai soldiers approached, his pet cradled gently in his arms, its eyes wide and alert. He walked toward Ezra and Kira, his movements cautious but deliberate. The soldiers from both sides watched in tense silence, their hands on weapons but not drawing them. The Curnai soldier stopped a few feet away, his gaze flickering between the humans. There was something different about him, something that had shifted since their first meeting. Ezra noticed the small pet in the soldier's hands. It was an entirely different creature from the one Kira had, but it shared the same gentle demeanor. The soldier's voice was low, almost hesitant. Your people have shown us something. His words were slow and deliberate, the accent thick and difficult to understand. We have been blinded by our need for power. We saw only enemies, but you have shown us kindness. Through the pets. Ezra couldn't believe what he was hearing. Kindness? He repeated, almost skeptically. The soldier nodded. Yes. Through them, we began to see that our war was pointless. You understand them, these creatures. You see them as companions, as family. That is something we had forgotten. Kira stepped forward, her expression a mix of relief and disbelief. You're saying the war could end? The soldier didn't answer immediately, but the silence that followed spoke volumes. His gaze dropped to his pet, and it was as if the answer was already in his eyes. A new kind of negotiation began that day, not between diplomats, not between generals, but between two species who had learned to respect the creatures that had once only been seen as symbols of war. The humans shared stories about their pets, about their own bond with animals back home. They spoke of the warmth, the companionship, the loyalty they had felt for their own pets, how it had helped them get through the darkest times. In turn, the Curnai soldiers began to open up about their own lives, their own experiences with their pets. They explained how the creatures had been there for them through long campaigns, how the pets' quiet presence had provided comfort in ways their own kind could never understand. It became clear that the connection was mutual. These pets were not just animals. They were a bridge. Days turned into weeks, and the discussions continued. The Curnai began to ask questions, curious questions about human emotions, about empathy, about the kind of society humans had built that was so focused on love and connection. These questions were once considered weak or irrelevant by the Curnai, but now they were the foundation of a strange and tenuous alliance. And then, the unthinkable happened. The Curnai leaders, in their own way, agreed to a ceasefire. It wasn't a full-fledged peace treaty, but it was the start of something that no one had believed possible. The war had not ended with a single grand victory. It hadn't ended with a final, decisive battle. Instead, it ended in the quiet moments between species, as both sides learned from the simple, unspoken language of kindness. Months later, when the war was nothing but a distant memory, humans and Curnai worked side by side, rebuilding what had been destroyed. The once feared enemy was no longer just an enemy. It had become a partner, an ally. And the pets, the humble creatures that had started it all, became the symbol of a new era. Their simple presence had bridged the gap between two species on the brink of annihilation. It was strange, almost unbelievable, that the fate of a galaxy was decided by animals who had no understanding of the conflict at all. But perhaps that was the greatest lesson of all, that sometimes it is not the strength of weapons or the power of armies that defines victory. Sometimes it is the quiet bonds we form with the world around us, the compassion we show even to the smallest of creatures, that changes everything. As Kira and Ezra sat together under the stars, watching the pets they had come to love playing peacefully in the fields, they couldn't help but smile. They had survived a war, not through strength, not through destruction, but through kindness. And that, they realized, was the greatest victory of all. The days turned into months, and the uneasy ceasefire began to solidify into something more meaningful. The humans and Curnai, once bitter enemies, now worked side by side in the aftermath of the war. What had started as a connection through the shared bond of caring for the pets had grown into a deeper understanding. It wasn't just the creatures that had bridged the gap between them. It was the empathy, the kindness, the realization that both species were not so different after all. Kira and Ezra found themselves leading the charge in this new era of cooperation. They had seen firsthand the power of compassion. They had witnessed how a small act of kindness, even toward something as simple as an alien pet, had the potential to change the trajectory of history. In those quiet moments, when the Curnai soldiers let their guards down and interacted with their pets, something shifted. The walls of suspicion and hostility began to crumble. They learned to value the life of each other's species, not through politics or strategy, but through the simple recognition of shared emotion. And the pets, those once forgotten companions, became the symbol of this transformation. The creature's soft eyes and gentle ways served as constant reminders that, even in the darkest of times, There was room for love and compassion. They became icons, not of war, but of unity. As the human-Curnai alliance grew stronger, leaders from both sides, those who had once been set on an inevitable path to destruction, met in the newly established neutral zone. They gathered not for war councils, but for something altogether different, a summit of peace. This summit, held under the watchful gaze of the pets, became a turning point. Ezra stood on the balcony overlooking the gathering of human and Curnai diplomats below. The Curnai, with their towering forms and stoic faces, mingled with humans, exchanging ideas and gestures that once would have been unimaginable. The pets, of course, were everywhere, serving as bridges of connection, sitting beside diplomats, curling up in laps, or simply trotting peacefully between the two groups. No one had anticipated that these creatures would be the catalyst for such profound change, but it was happening, and it was beautiful. "Do you think we'll ever fully understand each other?" Kira asked, her voice quiet as she joined Ezra on the balcony. Ezra watched the scene below, the lively discussions, the laughter, the warm exchanges between once warring species. It felt like a dream, a miracle, almost. "I think we already do," he said, "in ways that go beyond language, beyond reason. We understand each other in the way we care for something else, something that isn't ours, but that we protect and nurture." Kira smiled softly, her hand resting on the soft fur of her tentacled pet. "It's a simple thing, isn't it? We all want to feel understood, to be cared for." Ezra nodded. "Yes. And now, we have a chance to build something better." Months turned into years, and the peace held. The Curnai and humans didn't forget the war, but they learned from it. They rebuilt together, sharing knowledge, technology, and culture in ways that neither side could have imagined before. The battlefields were transformed into lush fields where humans and Curnai worked side by side to cultivate the land, to bring life back to what was once desolate. Their homes, once destroyed, were now places of collaboration, where the pets had their own little corners of the houses, sitting peacefully beside their owners. Kira and Ezra became leaders in the new world they had helped shape. Their bond with the Curnai was unique, a testament to what could be accomplished when people looked beyond their differences. They would often speak of the early days, the days when a simple pet had turned the tide of a galactic conflict. It wasn't about the technology, the weapons, or the grand strategies. It was about empathy, about connecting through the smallest, most innocent of things. The pets, as symbols of the new era, were cared for with the utmost reverence. They were no longer just animals. They were a legacy, a living reminder of the day humanity and the Curnai had realized their shared humanity. Every anniversary of the ceasefire was marked by a celebration in their honor, where both species came together to remember the past and look toward the future. One evening, as the sun set over a peaceful world, Ezra sat on a porch overlooking a field. Beside him, his pet, a sleek, silver creature with wings, curled contentedly, its soft fur glowing under the light of the setting sun. Kira joined him shortly after, her tentacled companion perched on her lap, and together, they watched as the stars began to twinkle in the evening sky. "We did it," Kira said quietly, her voice filled with a sense of peace. Ezra smiled, his heart full. "We didn't just survive, Kira. We thrived. We found a way to live together. And it started with something as small as a pet." "Maybe that's the lesson," Kira said, her eyes soft as she looked at the creatures that had brought them together. "That sometimes it's not the grand gestures that change the world. Sometimes it's the little things." Ezra looked at her, then down at the pets beside them. "Yeah, the little things." And in that moment, as they sat under the stars, the weight of their shared journey seemed to lift. The war was over. The galaxy was at peace. And the creatures that had once been mere pets had become symbols of a future built on kindness, understanding, and the quiet power of empathy.